In light of the federally sanctioned goon squad currently terrorizing and disappearing people across the country, I think it's time to talk about the Palmer raids. Because, of course, this is far from the first time that the U.S. government has done something like this. Welcome back to Yesterqueers. My name's Amanda, and I'm a public historian of queer history. The Palmer raids didn't target queer people specifically, but they did target one of the community's biggest allies at the turn of the 20th century, American anarchists. But let's back up. During the First World War, one of the biggest political talking points was the so-called divided loyalty of naturalized citizens and first-generation Americans. During his State of the Union address on December 7, 1915, President Woodrow Wilson said, "I'm sorry to say that the gravest threats against our national peace and safety have been uttered within our own borders. There are citizens of the United States, I blush to admit, born under other flags, but welcomed under our generous naturalization laws to the full freedom and opportunity of America, who have poured the poison of disloyalty into the very arteries of our national life. Such creatures of passion, disloyalty, and anarchy must be crushed out. They are infinitely malignant, and the hand of our power should close over them at once." This fear was the seed of what would eventually become the first Red Scare, when the Bolshevik and German revolutions, combined with massive labor unrest, including a general strike in Seattle, convinced Americans that violent, radical, left-wing activists had infiltrated the country and were trying to destroy it from within. Many Americans felt that their fears had been confirmed when a group of Italian-American anarchists executed a series of bombings in the spring of 1919. They mailed 36 mail bombs to politicians, political appointees, and business leaders in April, and then in June they detonated 9 larger bombs nearly simultaneously in 7 U.S. cities. The bombs all included a pink leaflet titled "Plain Words" that read, in part, "We shall not rest until your downfall is complete and the laboring masses have taken possession of all that rightfully belongs to them. Long live social revolution." It was signed, the anarchist fighters. Most of the bombs were either intercepted or didn't detonate properly, but they did manage to hit 3 targets, including the home of Alexander Mitchell Palmer, the Attorney General. Palmer is a fascinating individual. He was a congressman before he became Attorney General, a very progressive Democrat from Pennsylvania who advocated for lowering tariffs, for placing a graduated income tax on the wealthy, and for laws that would prevent children from working in factories, mines, and quarries. He was also a Quaker who declined President Wilson's appointment as Secretary of War because of his religious beliefs. When he became Attorney General in 1919, one of Palmer's first acts was to release 10,000 German Americans who had been captured and held during World War I for no reason other than that they were suspected of being radicals, anarchists, or German sympathizers. He also consistently tried to temper the rising anti-labor and anti-red hysteria sweeping the country. But then a self-identified anarchist accidentally blew himself up on Palmer's front steps, and Palmer only survived because he just happened to step away from an upstairs window moments before the explosion. Palmer's house was bombed a month after May Day labor marches had descended into violent clashes with police in Boston, New York, and Cleveland, and a month before white-on-black violence exploded across the country over the summer, and black communities fought back fiercely. By the fall, hundreds of people, most of them black, were dead, and communities from Arkansas to Washington, D.C. were reeling. The federal government feared that foreign-born radicals had infiltrated labor movements and black communities and were turning them violent. There's a lot to unpack there. In October, the Senate called Palmer in and demanded a crackdown on foreign radicals. The next year was an election year, and Palmer wanted to run for president. Plus, he did want revenge for his house getting bombed. So, in the words of David Pietruzza, he transformed himself from a Quaker progressive to a fierce red hunter. First, he tried to prosecute a small Spanish-American anarchist group in Buffalo, New York, but they weren't connected to the bombing, so a federal judge threw his case out of court because anarchist speech is protected by the First Amendment. So then Palmer got creative. He went to the Senate and secured a $500,000 appropriation, about $9 million in today's dollars, and used it to set up a new division within the Justice Department's Bureau of Investigation. He called it the General Intelligence Division and tasked it with rooting out radicals. At its helm, he placed 24-year-old Justice Department Attorney J. Edgar Hoover. Yes, the GID is the predecessor to today's FBI. Since federal courts were staunchly defending the free speech rights of radical left groups, Palmer and Hoover decided to use immigration law instead. Anarchists were already forbidden from immigrating to the United States thanks to the Anarchist Exclusion Act of 1903. But the U.S. doubled down with the Burnett Act of 1917, which forbade all of these groups from immigrating. Queer people, by the way, were considered mentally defective and therefore were barred from immigrating. We were not legally allowed to immigrate to the United States until the Immigration Act of 1990 passed. Yes, openly queer people have only been legally allowed to immigrate to the United States for 35 years. On November 7th, 1919, Bureau of Investigation agents working with local police departments executed simultaneous raids in 12 U.S. cities. One of the people who was caught in the New York raid was a well-known anarchist activist named Emma Goldman, who Magnus Hirschfeld described as the first and only woman, indeed the first and only American, to take up the defense of homosexual love before the general public. Now, Emma was enthusiastically straight, but she spoke often about the need for what we would now call queer liberation, writing in a letter to Hirschfeld, "It is a tragedy, I feel, that people of a different sexual type are caught in a world which shows so little understanding for homosexuals and is so crassly indifferent to the various gradations and variations of gender and their great significance in life." Though the investigation and the subsequent raids were spearheaded by the Justice Department, it was the Department of Labor that had the authority to issue the warrants and sign deportation orders. And the Secretary of Labor, William B. Wilson, was not a fan of Palmer and Hoover's methods. So, of course, Hoover got crafty, although he would later deny it. He found sympathetic lackeys in the Department of Labor to push through the warrants that he wanted, and he convinced them that people who were arrested didn't need to be immediately informed that they were entitled to an attorney. The second round of raids started on January 2nd, 1920, and continued for 6 weeks in 30 cities across 23 states. There was violence, illegal search and seizure, enforced disappearance, pretty much all of the things that we're seeing today from ICE. All told, the government arrested somewhere around 5,000 people and kept several thousand of them in horrific conditions for months. But ultimately, they only managed to deport 556 political radicals and undesirables, mostly thanks to the intervention of the Department of Labor. None of the people who were deported were ever charged or convicted of a crime, and many of them, including Emma Goldman, were naturalized citizens who had their citizenship revoked. That's it for today. As always, more information, including sources and further reading, is available in the usual place.